Very excited to be here again in India, one of the most interesting places that I get to visit in my job. At this very moment in time, Minister Sachin Pilot is actually in Australia leading an Indian delegation, talking to the government of Australia about how you connect citizens. There's a slight scale issue, however. He's trying to connect 1.2 billion citizens. Australia's got 22 million. So I figure it'd be an interesting discussion to be a part of, because I think one challenge is very different from the other. But you can bet that one thing's going to come up in all of that: data, and how governments use data, and how we connect citizens and use that data more effectively. So I don't think any discussion can happen at the moment around data without addressing big data. And so I'm going to actually start by talking about big data and where Dell sees big data going. But before I do that, I just want to make sure everybody's hand is actually working. So I'm going to ask a non-technology question, and I think this should get everybody's hand moving. Who here would like to see the Indian national cricket team beat Australia on Indian home soil in the next Test series? Okay, so you'd actually rather see Australia win the next Test series here on Indian soil. Okay, so let's start with big data. We obviously talked about a lot in the Gartner presentation, so quick show of hands, who prior to that presentation has heard of big data? Right, you've heard it discussed, read about it in trade magazines. It's a big topic of conversation. Question I really want to ask you, though, is how many of you have actually implemented big data in your organization? So we got a couple, right? Why is everybody talking about big data? You know, technology companies like to kind of talk about the next big shiny new object, the big hype. The thing about big data is it's not about us not having enough data. I think all of the presentations you'll hear today and the problems you face in your organization are that not that we don't have enough data. It's probably that we've got too much data, and how do we use it more effectively? So big data is actually about business. It's about how you use the information that you have more effectively. So it's becoming real. There are some companies out there that are doing a fantastic job with big data, and they're using it for a competitive advantage. My favorite big data story actually comes out of the United States. One of the national retailer chains there gives its loyal customers a card. And when you buy something at the cash register, they scan the card. And they can track your purchases. That's relatively simple. You know, it's an ID number, and they track the purchases, and they keep that in a big database. What they do that's really interesting, though, is they track what you purchase, and they look at the trend. And they compare you to other shoppers. And they say, this shopper bought this collection of products, and so did this shopper. And what's alike? And my favorite story about this was a man who received through the mail a letter from this company addressed to his teenage daughter. And it said, here are some products you may be interested in if you are pregnant. So I'm a father of 3 daughters, and I think if I received some mail through my mailbox talking about one of my daughters being pregnant, it would be a fairly quick discussion with one of my daughters. But this being America, he did what Americans did, and he sued. And, you know, he launched this lawsuit, and he said, you know, how dare you send this letter to my daughter? Unfortunately, his daughter had to confess and tell her father that unfortunately she was indeed pregnant, and that the store knew about it before he did, because they were using data analytics to figure out what she was buying, and that there was a good chance, a high likely chance, that she was pregnant based on what she was buying. So big data has some incredible opportunities, but also has some very unintended consequences if you're a teenage girl and you haven't told your father that you're pregnant. But the moral of the story is, it's not about the data, it's about what you do with it. And you can see down the bottom, and echoing what Gartner just said, through 2015, when this actually starts to get traction, we think that 70% of investments are really going to come through analytics, information analytics, as companies truly start to think about how they use the data that they've collected. Interesting data point. Sometime this year, a smartphone user will create more data in 1 month than they created in the entire year of 2008. There's a good chance that if your company has created a smartphone app, and many companies are doing that, a lot of that data is going to be flown into your organization. And so the smart companies are figuring out how they use that. So let's talk about the maturity model. Because like anything, there's a level of maturity that goes with this. So stage one, really no action. And for many companies, it's kind of where they are today. And it's literally chaos. You know, data's everywhere. There's no real value being extracted from the data. You're just busy trying to keep it. No control, at high risk, non-compliant, no access. And it's really just bits of data kind of floating around. Stage two, though, is when you kind of start to retain that data. You're keeping it, but you don't really know what the value is. All you've done is figure out how to kind of put it somewhere. You've got manual controls in place, so all of that automated storage that we were just talking about in the prior presentation, none of that's kind of in place. And there's limited access. It goes in, it doesn't really come out again. So stage three, things start to get a little more interesting. You probably have a storage policy. You're starting to optimize your storage. You know the value of the data. You know how you can use it to your advantage in your company. You've got some policy around it. So you know what you need to keep because you legally have to keep it, and what you need to keep because you can take some business value out of it. And you have access to it. You know where to go find it when you need it. And so now you're really starting to play not just with data, but actually information starts to become useful. So stage four, this is where you're starting to take the information and use it, and you're gaining some knowledge, most likely about your customers, about your business, about your suppliers, about your partners. And you're starting to do some simple analytics. You're modeling the data. You're trying to figure out some trends. How can you use this more effectively? You're starting to correlate the data. I'm looking at customer 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I'm correlating their purchase behavior. I'm correlating how they interact with me. What's the same? How can I interact with them more effectively? You're doing some manual interpretation. So you're actually looking at it and you're trying to figure out some of the trends. And importantly, it's searchable. If you want to go find something, you've got the ability to use a search engine and go find it. Now you're starting to get proactive. You've overcome that issue of how do I manage this data deluge that's coming, and how do I start to use that information more effectively. And then stage 5. This is where you are now proactively talking to your customers and actually making strategic decisions based on the data that you have. So you're doing some fairly complex modeling, complex correlation, interpretation. A company that has built their business on this, and one that you've probably either, if you haven't bought from them, you've probably gone to their website, searched them, is Amazon.com. So my first interaction with Amazon.com was actually back in 1996, which is about the year that they were founded. I read a small article in a magazine called Fortune about a company that had been formed in Seattle by a man who wrote a business plan while he was driving from one side of the United States to the other. That company became Amazon.com. Now, 1996, 1997, not many people on the internet. I managed to get onto his website with a 9600 baud, modem. It was a text site, and I bought a book. Fast forward to 2012, Amazon.com can tell you everything I've ever bought from them. They make recommendations based on what I've bought in the past. They know what I've searched for. They will make suggestions. They can tell you every place I've ever lived in. They can even tell you which hotels Dell has in their corporate hotel directory, because when I go to the United States, I actually have goods delivered to me in the US. They know all the credit cards that I've ever had. That's a company using data most effectively. And they are compelling me to purchase from them. They send me an email that says, hey, we realize you just bought this book. You may be interested in this because people who bought this book also bought this book as well. So at this end of kind of stage 5, there are companies out there and they are doing extremely well. But you can see it's a phased approach. You are going to go through these stages. You may kind of go backwards and forwards. It's going to get tough. It's going to take a lot of money and a lot of time and investment. But the value that you get out of it is certainly going to make you competitively differentiated from the competition. So big data at the moment is one of those kind of hype technologies, right? And we're going to go through, like any kind of technology, kind of going to go through this hype phase. We're going to go through that disillusionment phase where we kind of think, is this thing actually going to go work? And then we're going to kind of come out the other side. The thing about big data is it is real. If you think about the Amazon.com example, you'll start to think of other companies where you start to think, actually, there's a company that's doing big data and doing it particularly well. The thing about it, though, is if you don't do it well, you're going to kind of find yourself in those sort of yellow and purple lines where you start to wonder, am I actually getting any value out of this? And so you really do need to checkpoint. You really do need to figure out, what do I need to do to make this successful, and where do I start to see the payoff? Because if you don't handle these issues of control and optimization, you really are going to kind of stay below that line of where you're adding true value, and it just becomes a cost to your business. And that's the thing, right? You're going to spend some money to implement big data. If you don't do it correctly, you're never going to get through that kind of $0 break-even point where you're developing a real return on investment. So the opportunity around big data for your company is huge. There's a good chance that the big data discussion in some form is going to come from your CEO or your CFO or your marketing head. And he's going to come to you, or she's going to come to you and talk to you about how your competitor is using data and is using it more effectively than what you are, and what are you in the IT department doing about that? I'm sure you've had that discussion in the past around other technologies. The thing about big data, of course, is the challenges are very, very big. We've talked about this morning just some of the challenges around the storage environment as it stands today without even implementing big data. So if you think about the stages of maturity, there is a roadmap to get there, but it is going to take implementing those storage policies and some of the steps that Gartner referred to this morning. And I'm going to talk through some of that and where Dell's going in its storage architecture this morning. So what's Dell doing around big data? It's easy for us to talk about what others are doing and how companies are implementing it. We have some real solutions today that we've invested in. So two companies that we've partnered with, or three, sorry, Rainstore. Rainstore sort of handles that big data retention issue. So it's kind of the storage side of this. How do I start to retain that data, both semi-structured and structured data, into a warehouse? And then how do I start to move that into analytics? So stage 1, 2, and 3 is really that retention, getting the data into the warehouse. And then stage 4 and 5 is where I'm actually really starting to apply analytics, which is really where we start to work with companies like Hadoop and Cloudera. So the areas that you start to really want to address are storage virtualization and consolidation, data protection, data retention, and governance. All of those things that the Gartner team just spoke to us about. So we think that we've got some innovative solutions that can kind of get you started. We're not offering this kind of big bang. We come in one day and we solve your big data issue. What we've got is some very structured solutions that start you down that maturity path of moving from phase 1 through to phase 5. And you can see that on the big data retention, that Rainstore, there are some real advantages that come from that. So we see kind of 1/10 of the cost with this solution, 40 to 100 times compression of the data. It's a small footprint. So as we start to consider things like power consumption, floor space in the data center, our ability to do more on a smaller footprint becomes more critical. Ease of operation, the cost of keeping lights on, the cost of labor in storage is excessive. And so this is a way of us actually automating and making it easier to actually use. No specialized skill sets required. It's scalable, and it's low risk deployment. We've tested this. We know that it's ready to go. So that's kind of on the storage side. But big data is not just about storage. It's also a compute issue as well. So on the compute side, now you're starting to get into the analytics. You're talking about a very heavy node requirement to actually churn through this data. And that's really where big data starts to become of value, is that analytics piece. And this is where we start to use Cloudera and Hadoop. So you think about Hadoop, it's like open source software for storage in the way that we would think of Red Hat is for an operating system. Again, low risk deployment, it's tested, we know that it works. Integrated support, so a single point of contact for this. And something I really want to draw your attention to is the Dell Crowbar initiative. So Dell Crowbar is really Dell's commitment to the open source community. So this community that is focused on open standards, open source, this is Dell investing not just open source technology that we have, but making investment through technology for these companies to go develop on. It's scalable, as you would expect. Big data requires significant scale, and then expertise. So leading providers who can help you go develop this. So big data is real. You will hear a lot of hype about it. And it's one of those areas where you've kind of got to sort through that hype and figure out where you are and what you want to achieve and how do you get there before you start implementing that. But rest assured, there are solutions out there that can help you with that, and Dell would be very pleased to talk to you about those. So I want to shift gears a little bit now. So if big data is something that we're going to kind of start to invest in, and it takes us out through 2015, where are we today? What's kind of the reality of working in storage today? And there's a reason we've got the forklift truck on there that will become apparent as we kind of work through this presentation. So Dell's heritage is not one particularly of storage, but I'll tell you that people would associate with storage. I'll tell you a quick anecdote. Dell actually started as a storage company, believe it or not. Michael Dell tells this story himself. People believe that he actually started his company building PCs. His actual very first product was hard drives. He built hard drive kits that went into IBM PC clones back in the early 80s. So when you bought an IBM PC clone, you had to put your own drive into it. And so he was building drive kits to go into IBM PCs. To test that, he built his own PC. And he had a customer that came to see him and said, hey, come to look at the drives, but the drive's particularly interesting, but tell me about that PC. Can I order it? He said, not only can I order it, can I order a couple of hundred for my company? And so that's how Dell actually got started in PCs. When people say, is Dell new to storage, Michael Dell will tell you that he actually started out as a storage company and transitioned into PCs. But really, it's the investments that we've made in the last 5 years that have started to really distinguish us now as having a storage strategy. So if you think about where we are today in data, there's a significant tax. We talk about data really being the new currency. So yes, we pay for a lot of things with notes. We also pay for a lot of things with data. You pull out your credit card and you pay for something, ultimately you're paying with money, but it's also data. It's a form of currency that you're exchanging. And data growth is really out of control. It's tipped to grow anywhere sort of 44x over the next several years. It's wasted capacity, inefficient utilization out there. 80% of the data is inactive. So we bring that data in and we keep it and we never touch it again. If it's sitting on tier 1 storage, not only is it being useless, but it's costing you a lot of money in very, very expensive storage. Systems have become complex. They've become inflexible to manage. You're investing more labor and more people to keep these systems running. And we tend to think this kind of idea of the more complex, the more capable. Unfortunately, when you look at all the other things that happen in storage, that just does not ring true. We're not making greater use of our data as these systems become more complex. We're just spending more money on them. Data recovery is difficult, so when you have a problem, getting that data back is difficult and it's slow, and sometimes it doesn't even work. Replication is costly, equally unreliable. So when you need it most, is it going to actually work? And then when it comes time to upgrade and you want to move to the next level, you actually find that you've got to go forklift upgrade this thing that you just spent an enormous amount of money implementing. So the risk of technology obsolescence is high. So Dell's legacy was really, we came from an area, from a background of being a storage reseller. We resold other people's technology. And at the time when we sold that technology, it was great technology. We did a lot of cool things with it. Our customers did some fantastic things with it. But there came a point where as we started to look at these issues, we asked ourselves, what storage platforms and technologies did we need to be investing in to start to solve these problems and where the industry was going? And so over the last 5 years, we've invested well over $3 to $4 billion acquiring our own intellectual property around storage, specifically tailored to go fix these problems. Because we really felt that the innovation wasn't coming from the big storage vendors. The innovation was really coming from these small startups. People who thought that maybe things could happen a little bit differently and that they could innovate. Companies like Equalogic, companies like Ocarina, companies like Compellent. all now part of the Dell family. So as we started to kind of cast our net out and our view out of where storage needed to go, we started to look for those companies that I just mentioned. So Ocarina, the leading deduplication technology on the planet, bar none. When we bought Ocarina, what we bought was an extremely complex mathematic algorithm, which we locked away in a safe, not out in the public domain, and some scientists who built that algorithm. Extremely valuable IP that's unique to Dell. So it does the best compression out there in the industry. Compellent was built from the ground up to handle things like thin provisioning and auto-tiering. So when we saw very few hands going up around, implementing those technologies, the reason we went and invested in a company like Compellent was out of the box, it implemented those technologies and it did it in an automated, flexible, scalable way that reduced cost and made it easier for you to go implement and didn't require a forklift upgrade. So Compellent's very first customer is still using the frame that they sold to them 5 to 6 years ago. They've done numerous upgrades along the way, but the frame is still there. That's very, very powerful in terms of the cost and the flexibility of that platform. We continue to invest. This year we bought Aperture in the software space. And so we come from an area where we're looking at the problems of today and tomorrow and making some very, very key investments in how we go solve those. So we actually think this, the right solution here is fluid. And you heard Harsha this morning talk about fluid. Why do we use the word fluid? If you think about water, water actually finds the most efficient and effective path over any surface that it finds itself on. And so we like to think of data the same way. We'd like your data to actually find the most efficient and effective way through your organization. Able to adapt constantly, become more flexible, and really shift you from operation to innovation. And that will really start to set you up for that big data discussion. So what can fluid data do for you? What kind of benefits can Dell's technology bring and the investments as we start to integrate them into our company? So maximum efficiency, we're seeing savings of up to 80% around optimization, utilization, advanced thin provisioning and virtualization. The reason we bought and invested in the EqualLogic platform was it's the best virtualized storage platform on the planet. So when we looked at EqualLogic and its investment path, its integration and its alignment with the leading virtualization technologies out there is second to none. And so if you have virtualized your server environment, and most companies have either done that or are certainly on the way to it, you'll get even greater benefit out of a virtualized storage environment. And EqualLogic and Compellent both have fantastic stories in that space. And then automation. So where you start to see really big savings is where you start to take the person out of the loop. Start to put smarts into your environment where let your storage system start to do some of that work for you. Manual is better than not doing it at all, but automated is even better. And so these technologies and our platforms are really designed around automating that, getting the cost out of your people keeping the lights on, and freeing up that investment for you to go innovate in new applications and business value. So greater agility, scalability without a forklift upgrade. So as you have a need to upgrade, and certainly the data deluge continues, you're going to face that prospect at least at some point. Doing that without a forklift upgrade is extremely compelling. Easy to deploy and update. So all of this is really built around those tenets of how do we get cost out of your business? How do we make this storage environment not just more effective, but easier to go manage? And then lastly, but importantly, given the importance of what we're talking about, resiliency, uptime of that data, making sure that it's available and it's not lost. I was talking to a CIO about 6 months ago, and he was telling me that in his particular company, they are liable in sense of a legal sense for 80% of the data that they have in their business. So more than 80% of their data they have to keep because they are liable for it in a legal sense. And so you can start to think about how important resiliency, backup, archiving, and retention is to a CIO such as that. I want to give you an example of a local company, Adrian, who has done some really cool things with our platform. So EqualLogic runs on the iSCSI protocol, and if you kind of want to start a debate amongst IT people, get into the fiber channel iSCSI debate. I've done it many times. It's a fascinating debate. But if you can kind of move past that and you move past the protocol, you start to see some companies doing some really interesting things with our platform. So this is the EqualLogic platform. They're running their SAP environment on a platform which has it's just some outstanding horizontal peer-to-peer scale-out capability. So if you are looking at horizontal scale-out, EqualLogic is a absolutely unbelievable platform to go do that. And in some of the workshops this afternoon, we'll get into that. But look at some of the advantages that this company had. 20% reduction in customer delivery time due to user productivity enhancement. So this isn't just a benefit in their IT environment. This is a benefit to their business and to their customer based on the way that they've implemented their storage environment on the EqualLogic platform. So the Fluid Data System really is about this kind of end-to-end architecture that takes you all the way from file, block, object data right through to, when you're ready for it, cloud, off-premises storage of your data. And you can see the ability for it to move through all of those tiers backwards and forwards seamlessly. Load balancing, local recovery, replication, disaster recovery, backup, archiving, and eventually seamless integration with the cloud. All driven around these key tenets of efficiency, agility, and resiliency. And you might ask, so how do we go do that? It's a neat slide. There's bubbles moving backwards and forwards. Can we truly do that? So what I want to talk to you now is really about what do we mean when we talk about the fluid data architecture. Where is Dell in this continuum? So if you look at today, virtualized scale-out storage, automated tiering and migration across RAID types, we have that today in our platforms. Thin provision volumes and data copies available today. Non-disruptive upgradability and seamless scalability, all core challenges, core issues that you can go implement today in production and move into off-site recovery. Object-based archiving. So our DX platform does some amazing things around this space. It's scalable, cost-effective, long-term retention. So if you've got data you need to keep over the long term, great platform to go do that. It's content-aware, and you can do policy-based migration. You can choose what data you retain and how you go do that. All available today based on the fluid data architecture. And backup to disk. So space-optimized, disk-based appliances using standard backup processes. So when we talked about some of the storage policies and what people were doing today and the show of hands, there's great opportunity with what we have today to go and improve the environment that you have. And I know that some of you will already be on this path, some of you will be ahead of it, some of you will be trying to figure out where to start, but all of this is available today. And then scalified unified infrastructure, so integrated, file service-based, and a clustered file system. So importantly though, and why we're sharing this is we're really looking for customers and partners who are ready to kind of take this journey with us. We're all at a little bit of a different place, and so I'm going to kind of talk to you now about what's the future. I want to share with you the blueprint for where we're taking this. So a common optimized architecture. So content-aware dedupe and compression across that entire environment. Rehydrate only on content access. So our ability to dedupe data as it kind of goes into each of these tiers is something we're going to be bringing to the fluid data architecture. Unified file block and object management across the environment. So integrated migration, management across that entire infrastructure. So now you're starting to see the file system really start to come to the fore. And then seamless server integration is something we're really excited about. As a company that now offers solutions across the server, network, storage environment, the great benefit that we have, a great opportunity we have, is start to build these technologies so that they're complementary and so they work better together. We invested in a company called RNA Networks, which is going to allow us to treat the storage in your server is tier 0. So you think about fast, rapid access to your data, having it in the server is about as fast as you can possibly get, and we'll integrate that into this entire environment. Now, caution you, there is a little bit here now of future speak. We're talking about where Dell is going. And the reason we share that with you is because we think it's important to show you what our vision is for storage, where we're making the investments, and where if you start the journey with us, ultimately you can get to. Because in each of this architecture, there are different starting off points and different places that you can start to build, but ultimately it will solve a number of the key challenges that we talked about at the beginning. And then eventually seamless cloud integration. So now you start to see not just within your environment, but starting to move to an off-premises cloud environment as well. Great news is we've got a huge portfolio, and we invite you today to learn more about that. We've got a number of the systems out there on the floor that you can go play around with and look at some of the simulations. But you can see right through the environment, from Compellent storage, scalable fiber channel-based product, multi-protocol, self-optimized, thin provisioning, auto-tiering, equal logic, unified virtualized IP storage, all the way through to DX-based storage archiving. So a very, very wide portfolio of technologies, and you can start to see that we're making some very, very serious bets in storage. So, part of this is trying to make this easier for you to get the value out of the investments that we've made. So, you can go implement point products, and for most people and most customers, there's a point where you've done this. You've had to. You've kind of done it yourself. It's cost you a lot of money. There's a lot of complex process because you've kind of added bits as you've gone along, and so every time you've added a piece of technology, you've had to add a new process. Then you start to move into custom solutions where you hire a vendor to come in. Maybe you've got an SI doing some work for you. It's going to cost you more money, but you've probably reduced your process time. You've made it more efficient, but your upfront cost has been more expensive. What we're looking at in Dell is really business-ready solutions, looking at those key pain points, your key challenges, and delivering business-ready solutions that you can go implement. Cut down on the process, make it as efficient as possible, and by doing that, actually cut down on the cost. So these are pre-configured, they're tested, they're ready for deployment, built using the best practices, and all about lowering complexity. In terms of services, because obviously technology doesn't implement itself, we have a very large services business in Dell now, well over $2 billion business. It's a sizable investment we've made, and particularly across storage, we have a number of services that can help you no matter where you are and in the continuum of building out your storage architecture, and no matter what activity you're involved in, we've got a service that can help through from design to deployment right through to, importantly, after-sales support to keep things running smoothly. So, what we're really trying to show you here today is we have really, really thought very long and hard about the challenges in storage and making sure that we bring solutions to you that are truly end-to-end, not just hardware, but also the services that wrap around that so you extract the most value from it. Another customer case study, just so you kind of get some proof points around this and see how customers are starting to use fluid data architecture to drive advantage. This is Apollo, and you can see the quote there from the head of IT, but using virtualization to kind of future-proof their environment. Significant time savings in data replication, all while they're expanding their existing storage. So one of those key issues of, how do I replicate in this environment that's actually growing super fast? So any of you that have gone through a major storage upgrade will find that your data can grow 2x while you're doing that upgrade. So Apollo has implemented a solution here that allows them to replicate their data within hours instead of days. So a significant time saving for them. It's not just us talking about our storage. We obviously would stand up here all day and talk to you about our storage. We're starting to see the industry and industry's journals take note and we've won some really key awards for what we're doing. And a lot of these awards are coming in the area of reliability, innovation, solution. So we're very excited to see that the industry is recognizing us. And these awards are coming through things like virtualization journals. So the virtualization industry recognizing the benefits that our storage have around virtualization. So some very exciting awards there. So, what we really set out to achieve when we built this idea or this concept of fluid data was constantly adapting to change. One thing you can count on is your environment is going to change. You can't predict the way that your users are going to interact with you. For the first time last year, smartphones outsold PCs. PCs still had a healthy growth. So the number of devices, the number of interaction points with your company and your IT environment are just continuing to explode. So your ability to cope with change is key. And so we've built all of these solutions with maximum flexibility in mind. How do you move from this rigid cost structure? How do you move from this environment that is somewhat resistant to change, is labor intensive, to one that is far more flexible and you start to derive value out of, and ultimately positions you really well for that big data discussion, and then really shifts you from operation to innovation. So the thing about data is, we're talking today, a lot of the issues we're thinking about today is, how do I just deal with that deluge? But if you can be a company like Amazon, a company like Target or Walmart, and figure out how to use that data, then it becomes a competitive advantage. And IT becomes an innovator, and you really do start to show true value to your business. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. It's always a tremendous honor to talk to our customers, and a tremendous honor to come visit you here in India. And do look forward to taking the opportunity to meet each of you out there on the floor as we go through the day. So thank you very much, and enjoy your time here at Storage Forum.